What's up, guys? This is Kephas.
Welcome to SBA Spotlight. In these videos, I'll be covering how well the single button assistant performs for each spec, what it does well, where it falls short, and how to get the most out of it, especially if you're looking for a lower stress or more accessible way to play. So whether you're here to relax, overcome a limitation, or just see how far one button can take you, I've got you covered. Alright, so let's talk about the single button assistant and how it's doing with Frost Mages. Long ago, in the days of Classic WoW, Frost Mages were known for having a one button rotation, and here we are, once again we've come full circle with the single button assistant, and honestly, it's doing pretty good. According to Wowhead though, it depends on what hero specialization you choose. If you are a Frostfire, you're going to be able to pull off about 81% of your optimal DPS potential on a target dummy. And if you are Spellslinger, it's going to be a little bit less, about 75% of your potential. So there is a bit of a gap there, and it's very similar to the gap with the assisted highlight. Frostfire pulls ahead with that as well. So I'm assuming that it must have something to do with how these tools are prioritizing the rotation. Anecdotally, after spending a couple days on a Frost Mage messing around with both hero specializations, I can say that I too was doing much better as a Frostfire than I was as Spellslinger, so take that for what it's worth. Either way, these numbers aren't too bad, especially when you consider what the single button assistant is able to do for Frost Mage, because it's able to do a lot. When you consider all the procs that a Frost Mage has to deal with, you've got Fingers of Frost, Brain Freeze, Winter's Chill. You have to track your icicles if you're using Glacial Spike. Then of course you have extra cooldowns like Comet Storm, Ray of Frost if you choose them as talents, and of course Frozen Orb. And the single button assistant is able to manage all of that. In other words, it's pretty much going to do your entire DPS rotation, and it will even use Blizzard when you're fighting multiple enemies. Overall, it does seem to be doing a pretty decent job at managing a very simplified version of your rotation, using your abilities on cooldown, using Glacial Spike as soon as you have 5 icicles, and of course using Ice Lance when you have nothing else to do and you have Winter's Chill active or Fingers of Frost. It'll even use Shifting Power once your abilities are on cooldown. So for the most part, it does seem to be doing a pretty decent job at keeping up with everything, unless you start moving, then it starts to get hung up a little bit. Oftentimes when you move, you'll use an instant cast ability if it's available, or even just spam Ice Lance. But if the single button assistant wants to use Frostbolt and you start moving, it's not going to try to use Ice Lance. It might use another ability if it becomes available and it's instant cast, but oftentimes it's just going to get hung up on Frostbolt. So in those situations, I recommend maybe having Ice Lance or something on a separate button just in case you're in a situation where you have to move a lot and you're trying to do some kind of damage. But that's the only time it ever really feels clunky to me. And again, as I said, the tool will manage Blizzard in multi-target situations. It's able to track when enemies are nearby, and it's also able to manage round targeting abilities. It will simply use it over your current target, and it'll hit any enemies that are nearby. So it's able to manage a lot, but there are a couple of abilities that it will not manage. One ability of note is Cone of Cold, particularly if you choose the Coldest Snap talent, which would bring Cone of Cold into your rotation. Unfortunately, it does not bring it into the single button assistant, so you would have to manage it separately. Which is probably for the best, because it's one of those abilities that you want to make sure that you're positioned correctly before you use it. And as with any class, the single button assistant will not manage your offensive cooldown. In the case of Frost Mage, that would be Icy Veins. But there is some good news, because Icy Veins can be used off the global cooldown, which means that you can macro it in with the single button assistant using a simple macro. I've created a macro in the description that will use the single button assistant and also Icy Veins whenever it's available. It'll also use any unused trinkets that you have. I've also added a no channeling conditional to the macro, and even if you don't want to macro with Icy Veins, you might want to make a macro using this conditional with the single button assistant anyways, because the single button assistant will use Shifting Power, which is a channel ability, and if you continue to press it, it will interrupt that ability. Also the case if you have Ray of Frost as a talent, the single button assistant will use that, and that is another channel ability. So if you're going to be using these abilities and you plan to spam the macro, you absolutely want to create a macro with no channeling as a conditional with the single button assistant. And again, you will find that in the macro that I've provided in the description. So when you consider everything that it's able to do, the single button assistant is very effective for Frost Mage, and it's even putting up some pretty decent numbers. Of course, like with all of these, there's still lots of room to do higher damage if you step outside the single button assistant. What I mean is, if you want to do more damage than what the single button assistant is able to do, then I would certainly recommend that you don't use it and you learn how to play your class and do it the manual way. But of course, if you're someone like me that needs it for accessibility, or you're simply a casual player looking to have a more chill experience, then the single button assistant is going to get you pretty far. It's incredibly user-friendly, and with a simple macro, it can be made even better and manage everything that your Frost Mage needs to use for damage. And that's pretty much everything I've learned for now. But as always, I'd love to hear from you. What do you think of the single button assistant, and how is it working out for you so far? Let me know in the comments. But with all that being said, I will see you guys on the next one.
Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, let me know by clicking that like button, and feel free to share it with your friends so they can enjoy it as well. And if you'd like to see more videos, you can subscribe to the channel, and click on the bell icon to be notified as soon as new videos are posted. You can also follow me on Facebook, and if you'd like, you can support my work on Patreon. Links to all that stuff can be found in the description below. This is Kephas, until next time.